Good afternoon, everyone. Good morning to Philip, who is currently in Norway. Welcome to the third Geo Lecture Series. This is brought to you by the Philippine Geographical Society in partnership with the UP Department of Geography. And this is part of the 40th anniversary celebration of the UP Department of Geography. My name is Joseph Alice, and I will be your moderator for this lecture. Just a few reminders before we proceed. Kindly keep your microphones on mute during the presentation. We encourage you to interact by typing your comments and questions in the chat box. They will be addressed during the open forum. Also, please note that this meeting is being recorded and streamed at the Department of Geography YouTube channel. The recording will be made available for viewing after the event. Before we proceed to the actual lecture, please welcome Emmanuel Garcia, the president of the Philippine Geographical Society, to give the opening remarks.
Thank you, Sir Joe. Good afternoon, everyone. I apologize for not being able to open my camera due to my internet connection. I am happy to welcome everyone to our third Geo Lecture Series. This is our monthly sharing of geographical research done by our fellow geographers and allies in the field. This is brought to us by the Philippine Geographical Society and the UP Department of Geography. The Geo Lecture Series is our previously PGS Lecture Series and Department of Geography webinar series combined into one. And this is also part of the 40th anniversary celebration of the UP Department of Geography. We are excited for this afternoon's talk, where our invited speaker will discuss radical and experimental practices in cartography. This is very interesting since we all can attest as to how cartography and maps have been an everyday tool for us, not only to navigate around, but to also understand complex data sets, social interactions, and quite simply, our everyday geographies. We have generated a word cloud from your registration entries. Front and center of these words are maps, geography, change, radical, political, and typical. Other entries also include relevant, unbounded, liberating, unsettling, innovative, and activism. It will be very interesting to see how this word cloud connects to this afternoon's lecture. Again, maraming salamat po for joining us on behalf of the Philippine Geographical Society and the Department of Geography. Welcome to our third Geo Lecture Series for 2020.
Thank you, Eman. Allow me to introduce our esteemed speaker for this lecture. Philippe Rekacewicz is a French geographer who co-published a book entitled Radical Cartography Explorations with Nepti Zouer in 2022. After the completion of his study in geography at the University of Paris, La Sorbonne, he became a permanent collaborator of the international newspaper Le Monde Diplomatique in Paris until 2014. From 1996 to 2007, he was also heading the cartographic unit of the relocated office of UNEP, United Nations Environment Program in Norway, where he is now based, and was associated with various international initiatives with the UNDP and OSCE. Since 2014, he has been involved in projects linking art and cartography with art museums, research institutes, and international organizations. He is co-coordinator with Philippe Rivière of the website visionscarto.net, and I really highly urge you to go there to see a lot of their cartographic interventions. It's a research website dedicated to radical and experimental cartography and geography. Since 2017, he acts as an associate researcher at the Department of Anthropology of the University of Helsinki in Finland for the program Cross Locations. Currently, he is affiliated with the social science group at the Wageningen University and Research for the program Embodied Ecologies. May I now welcome our speaker for this afternoon, this morning, Dr. Philippe Rekacewicz.
Thank you very much. Yeah, morning for me and this afternoon for you. So, Thank you for being here. So I will try to invite you and to embark you for half an hour into the wonderful world of radical critical experimental cartography, which is a challenge because it's a so rich and so diverse world that it's pretty difficult to resume to make a summary of this in 30 minutes. But we'll try to give some tracks, and then we will, of course, follow those tracks later on by readings. I used to say, first of all, that this is we lie somewhere between art, science, and politics, and also culture and economics and demography. It's well known that geography takes a little bit of all those disciplines. So is also in cartography, and what makes cartography very particular is that it's really because we use the tool of arts, the mean of arts to express ourselves. We never know whether we are in science or we are in arts. And if we express issues and we want to convey messages, we lie also somewhere between politics, but we pretend also to describe the world as precisely or as seriously as possible, if it's not possible to be precise. So we lie somewhere into the world science. So we don't really know where we are. I had prepared for you 4 small chapters. I'm not sure we go until the end, but we try to pick up a little bit of each of those issues. First things is to bring you a little bit of context, to address also and to come back to the definition of what could be radical or critical mapping, because this is important for understanding and also evocating the roots of the radical mapping so that it gives you a background to take better advantage or to better understand what can be some form of radical or experimental forms, practices of radical cartography. Be sure that the prerequisite of this short presentation will be this: that there is no such thing as an innocent map. It's taking here the opposite of what you usually hear about mapping, that has to depict the world the most faithfully as possible, the most neutral as possible, that the representation on the paper should be really representing something close to the reality. But the question is, what is the reality? Where is lying our right to interpret what we are seeing? And this is what we will see a little bit later on. But let's say that I wouldn't say that an innocent path exists. So this is why I think there is absolutely no such thing as an innocent path. And the other thing is that the map it's not only that it's not innocent, but it conveys to a message, and it has to show something which usually is not necessarily visible in the field. Mapping, or the visual representation of data, it's a very multimodal discipline that can be situated at the crossroad of all those disciplines that I was speaking of: science, ethic, technique, and aesthetic. Science, because we use the mean of science. Ethic, because we don't do whatever is unethical in maps. Aesthetic, because we use the mean of arts. And technique, because we also use computers and the tools that is supporting us, our scientific approach. Mapping, or representing visually data, information, can be quantitative, numbers, or qualitative. And this is where come in the idea of sensorial mapping. We usually fit into the idea that map is a visual composition, and the cartographer, we are the intuitive interface between the reality and its transposition into a visual representation. So we act basically like a filter. It's a synthesis of what we see what will happen in very large portion of the planet, country, continent, the world, the universe, but we can depict only a very tiny part of it. Which means one thing which is very important, because it's just impossible to put everything on a map, on a sheet of paper. And in this respect, the map is considered as a complete truncated representation of the reality, and therefore a lie by omission at least. And this is precisely that we can't say that the map can be neutral or impartial. It's essentially the result of the rational choices of the cartographer or the commissioners. The map is therefore subjective. It's a biased object, be sure of that, showing the world things not as is it really, but as the map producer sees it, interpreted. This is an interpretation. And this is why the map, in effect, is a really skillful, permanent, and I used to repeat this to my students, a dialogue between the reality and the cartographer's imagination. Reality versus imagination is always like that, because we map out of something which is real, something which has happened, which exists. We feel it, we perceive it, and we render it, and we render it our way. And this is why the map can't be innocent. It's an interpretation, after all. Novels are like that. It takes roots on the reality, on what really happened, but it's romanticized by the authors. We cartographers are authors. Sensorial mapping. So about sensorial mapping, and we'll start by this to address more generally what could be, it's my second point, radical or critical cartography. So what it is really, and why do we call it sensorial or emotional or critical? It is before everything, for me, I would call it a very free exercise of territorial deconstruction, where the cartographers allow themselves to pervert cartographic traditional convention and possibly reinvent the cartographic semiology and also geometry. We work with both. I used to only address the idea of semiology, applying colors, dynamic, contrast, movement. And also I see that the Euclidean geometry plays a very important role in the way we convey to the message, we convey to the drawing. And according to the kind of geometry we applied on the map, we can give also a message that says different things. So these maps and visual representations show spaces, territories, not only through tangible objects, the house, the roads, immobile object, but also mobile objects like cars, for example, or crowds moving, but also through feelings and sensation that you could feel when you think, when you wander, when you move around the space for territories. We map emotions, impressions, perceptions, and then we collect all these following a rather precise and scientific protocol, like we work on the field as an anthropologist or a geographer on the field. And through all the senses, whatever the scale is, to be the world, a continent, a country, a district, a neighborhood, or even an apartment or a room. A few years ago, I was teaching in Toulouse in France in a school, and we spent a whole week in a workshop with the students to draw a geopolitical map of the kitchen. So here it is in French, unfortunately. This is a drawing of the kitchen, and they were mapping, trying to map and to convey the idea that the kitchen was an extremely important space where a lot of things happens. There is conversations. There is a place where it's a place of power. It's a place where the things are deciding within the family or within the couple. This is a place for people, for example, a Colombian student were in France having this apartment, and the kitchen was the place where she could remember Colombia because she was cooking Colombian food. So even so, a 10 square meter could be mapped with the same tools as you would map a city, as you would map a country or a continent. Point, lines, and pens, all the tool, all the means of art, and the object you usually use to draw. One thing is important also when we speak about sensorial mapping is that the feelings and sometimes even places, they can't be represented as a Cartesian space, either because they are not localizable in longitude and latitude, or because they are crucial in the narrative of those who tell their stories and represent in their subjective experience a heavy emotional charge. So it's therefore necessary to map them with their proper importance. And we speak about feelings in places where we feel good or where we feel bad or where we feel threatened or in danger that we don't like, that evocate trauma in places that evocate the trauma that we have had in another place. So there is a disconnection between what we are mapping, feelings, emotions, and the space on which we operate. This said, this of course requires, this kind of cartography requires that we widely open all our senses, sight, hearing, smell, touch, and pay particular attention, on the one hand, to the concrete and factual element, the landscapes, the perspective, the substrates on which we move, or the elements, mobile or immobile, benches, trees, cars, crowds, people moving, cars driving. Like, for example, in this wonderful representation of a living space, again, it's in France, issued from a workshop, from sensorial mapping workshop, where you have here the house represented at the center of the world. To show how important it is this, we go back to the research center and periphery concept in geography, and where all is represented equally, all the activities, college, school, walk close to the water, friends, libraries, sports hall, etc., art school. We are somewhere between the geography and the imaginary, because it's of course disconnected from the geography, that this is how you would apply, and this is all the difficulties of this cartography, apply visual representation modes in, to feelings, what you love, what you don't love, what you like, what you don't like, where you go, where you feel good, where you don't feel good. Another way of representing something disconnected in this exercise, my Zurich student mapping his feeling and how he's using the urban space, here in Switzerland, in Zurich, where he gets, so you have recognized that the hate, love, lust, fear. So he's working with the scene and with a religious approach to it, which is funny enough. But a part of this, the place of love, the place of hate that he doesn't like, the place of fear, joy, and will, all are these elements magnificently rendered in this map, which includes the placing, approximate, so we are in the geography, but out in the geography, which includes the application of the semiology, the cartographical semiology, but as you see it also, some elements and some approach and principle of Euclidean geometry, which gives the sense to the map. I'm checking the time at the same time. So this sensorial mapping,
Il est 11 heures.
This sensorial mapping is very, as you understand, a very, very specific way to map the environment in the geography, out of the geography, taking into account how our emotions are shaping our understanding of and the special structures and organizations of the world. But it's not coming alone. And when we speak about definition, it's this sensorial mapping is part of a range of alternative practices, which is prolonging, continuing, expanding, maybe transcending conventional cartography so that we can show more of the world, much more than what this conventional, into bracket, cartography allows us. And we are all used of this. So these alternative practices could have various names, and you have met them. And it's an important point, and I will tell you why. You have been seeing literature articles approach descriptive in participative cartography or collective, or the counter cartography that Joseph is using very often. Now, when we come to perception, emotional, or even empirical, mental, sensorial cartography, it's a lot of name cartography for expressing something which is a radical or a critical approach. And we'll see in the history why it is radical and critical, and why we use this cartography. But all of this has to be put in the same bucket of alternative cartography that I would call experimental cartography. Have nothing better for now. Experimental cartography is that we try things. If it doesn't work, we try something else. And I would say there is, into the experimental cartography, this is the exploration of a new, or exploration cartography, we could say. It's to explore new way of making the world appearing on the drawing, how we could depict the world which is different. So there is a whole field of research. If by any coincidence there is some PhD, some pre-PhD candidate or master students who would really appropriate the idea, there is a whole field of research extremely interesting to address there. But of course, this comes also with examples that has to show, to illustrate what we mean with all this. Well, in short, we have a diversity of expression to speak about a specific way of mapping the world, and we will use this generic term, radical, critical, or more broadly, experimental cartography. But I have here one postulate, one prerequisite is to say that the map is a subjective document. It's I do not discuss the subjectivity of the map. I have no time here to prove it. As a good scientist or a good geographer, I would have to ask arguments. I have those arguments, and it will be the matter for another lecture, most probably. But we have to think the map as really a very biased and a very subjective elements. Representing the world the most faithfully as possible, the most unbiased or the most neutral is not possible. So I think it's vain. We would say a map is, if we would say a map is to represent the world as it is, or the best way, or again, the most neutral and the less unbiased as possible, I would get out of the idea that a map is a representation of the world, and where we become radical and subjective, and here there is really, we are in a crossroad where there is a turning point. I would consider the map, the visual representation, as a political and social act. It's not anymore, we represent the world, but we, at the same time, and maybe beforehand, we proceed to a political and social act. So let's see what it means, mapping as an activist, or mapping in a political way. With this map from Rem Koolhaas, the architect Rem Koolhaas, which has been leading an extremely huge work on the strategy of localization for building infrastructures, commercial infrastructures, business infrastructures. We are in the United States, and thinks you are Walmart, the owner of Walmart or the CEO of Walmart, and then you want to know much better on your customers. And from knowing much better your customer, you end up to understand that you can have a control of your with the tools, with the technology, Internet 3.0, 4.0. And he made the whole maps here where he could identify households by households who were coming in his shop. This one is a high spender. Oh, this one hasn't shopped in your store for the last 3 months, so we have to do something. It's identifying, and the radical cartography or critical cartography used in this sense is a political act, because it will set the seeds for actively trying to fight against too much surveillance, too much control. again, subjectivity, we speak about border of Europe. We know what borders in the Western and East is the Atlantic of, we speak of Europe. And if we ask the question, what is the border of Europe? The border of Europe is the Atlantic here. But where does it end and where Asia is starting? Who is able to answer this question? So here again, let's be a little bit radical and let's go through the history and see if the history can give us some answers. If we used to say that Europe finishes at Ural Mountains and after it's Asia, right in the middle of the Russia, we can say that it's just because there was a political act from General de Gaulle that wanted to build the friendship between Russia and France over the head of Germany after the Second World War. So that's the reason why he was considering this space here as political, as Europe. And what about Caucasus? And what about Israel, for example, which is definitely Middle East, but which is part of all European institutions and organizations because they don't want to be associated with the Arab world, which is around. So it means that there is basically no way to find out where Central Asia, definitely Asian, but they are also parts of all possible integrated European organizations, and they consider themselves as part of Europe and definitely not because that was the former Soviet worlds and definitely not towards Asia. So where does it end? So the only things we could say regarding this map, and this is where we have this interpretation, we know where Europe is starting in the Atlantic, maybe, and it's not clear because you have also to understand what Greenland is and what Iceland is, but it doesn't end at all. And there is no border in the concept of border, which would be a line. It's a long, long, long transition, thousands and thousands of kilometers where Europe is finishing in a long hug. And then we have this image. Europe is hugging Asia and long hug in Asia so that we don't know where it's finishing. So here you have two examples of a radical approach of the cartography where you deny the fact that you would rely on administrative border, those black lines, which definite the sovereignty of the states. I'm passing those images that you will find them. I have given the address and you can find this image and look at them a little bit more widely when you will download the PDF. My third point, I would like to evocate a little bit the roots of radical mapping because it helps us to understand that right from the middle of the 19th century until now, our practices as a radical cartographer, I consider myself, like Otto Neurath was saying, as an information designer or a radical or a critical cartographer. I think Joseph liked very much the idea of counter cartography, and it's of course totally legitimate. And counter cartography, I was not sure that it applies to me because I'm very much using the traditional mean of cartography. So I'm not a counter cartographer, I'm a cartographer which is discussing or challenging the modes we usually use to map the world. So these practices have emerged as early as the middle of 19th century. And it came from the real frustrations of intellectual researchers, and they were geographers, economists, statisticians, philosophers, geographers, engineers in various fields, who felt themselves extremely much constrained by the very descriptive atmosphere and environment of the period. It was very conventional. They didn't want to explain, even to show. They were just pretending describing the environment at the time. And some of them thought it's extremely boring. And when I speak of some of them, I'm speaking about Charles-Joseph Minard, for example, who invented the proportional representation. These are very, very famous, extremely famous figures, which shows Napoleon takes his army with 700,000 people, and he represented proportional here. He goes right to Moscow and he's coming back with 10,000 of them. So he kills 90% of his soldiers. And You can say this could be a text, but what is striking here, he understood the force, the power of the image that shows how disastrous was this campaign. For example, one which is a little bit unknown, Henri Dron. Henri Dron, very interesting French utopist, which has created also maps which were proposing new worlds. And there was a lot of them at the end of the 19th century. His name is in the Dropbox, and you can browse. That's the advantage of internet. You can seek on internet. It's pretty well referenced. Élisée Reclus, that you know, this anarchist geographer also, who hated maps as they were descriptive. He wanted to forbid the maps in schools because he was saying that the maps which are displayed to the kids doesn't have, it makes the opposite of learning. It's de-learning. It helps to de-learn the kids about the world, and he wanted to create some maps which were much more attractive. And of course, Marie and Otto Neurath, which has also created this concept of pictogram and isotype, browse on internet also, which has tremendously helped all this generation of workers at the beginning of the 20th century. Most of them were illiterate or were not reading newspaper, didn't have access to political and geopolitical information. And Otto Neurath was a good old socialist and communist, and was thinking that knowledge should be also conveyed to the lower part of the class. And we will speak, of course, of William Bunge and Gwendolyn Warren at the beginning of the 30s, of the 60s and the 70s, which have been creating the what they call the expedition in Detroit. And they have also, their idea was to map the invisible. For example, here, he was sacked from the university because he was a communist. He's settling in the poorest area in Detroit, and then he starts to map the inequality. And then, for example, he understood that the very rich white area are far away from the center town, and all those guys, they are working in the center towns, and they go by car from where they live, the rich neighborhoods, to the CBD, to the central business district where they are working, and they have to cross this very poor black area. And because it's a black area, they drive very fast because they pretend they are afraid, and then they roll over black kids which are going to school, much more than other places in the city. And William Bunge and Gwendolyn Warren, they are going to map this, to show it, and to use the map as an evidence for the justice. This is also one of the characteristics of radical mapping, that it pretends also to draw and to depict visually a situation based on a very scientific construction and work, so that it can be used as an evidence in a trial, in a justice, and possibly accepted by the judge, of course, which has happened at this time. So another practice is related to heuristic maps. Yeah, it's 14. I have 5 minutes still. I would like to quote at least two radical cartographers. They were not cartographers, but they became cartographers. Trevor Paglen and Marc Lombardy, that you maybe know, because I think there is an approach, there is a system, or they have invented a concept which we can use and which we have to use really on the field, on the project where we are all working on. Being in the field, having documentation, having a lot of information, structuring this information so that we can grab into this information some processes, some systems that are completely invisible to us. This is really the heart of my work. And Lombardy is a perfect example for this, and I will just show 2 or 3 slides of what he has done. So Marc Lombardy was an artist. He died in 2000 in very strange circumstances. Some of the people would say he was a conspirationist, which I don't think, because what he did say, I don't understand this work. I see there is movement between the military industrial lobby and the American administration and the Saudi administration, and this is fueling the war in the world here and there, and especially those which are building the armaments are very powerful, and those which have a lot of money are powerful. So what he did, he has, it was before Excel and before the computers, he had green cards and pink cards. On the pink cards, he was putting the name of all the politicians important in the rich country, which their links to other politicians or to industries. And in green cards, he was doing the same with industrials, and they're linked to the politicians. So on green cards, he had all the information linking the politicians and the important people to industry. And the green cards, the industry, which is what his work with those thousands of cards, was to link together in a drawing. And then he was doing this image de pensée, as we say in French, the thinking image, the first draft ever, sketch zero, as I call them. And he happened to have this, but he had to make it worth and to make it understandable, he had to apply semiology and geometry. What he did, again, before the computer, that's a lesson for us, to end up to this kind of images. And you see, from there to there. And what, of course, he has cleaned it and he has replaced again and adjusted those thousands and thousands of either industry or politician. And he ended up to show things which were very interesting. So let's have a zoom here. And you see at the center, you have the famous James Bath. And look at where George W. Bush Jr. is president of the United States, the one we see on the news, on the TV, the one who started, who at least started the war against terrorism, who were the most prominent. And look where Bin Laden is, the father or the brother, and Osama bin Laden. They are in the periphery. But here you have somebody that you don't know the name, James Bath. Who is this James Bath? He's a gray man. He's the one which is at the center of the system with far more power than the president of the United States or even the collaborator of George Bush at this time. So this is what the processes and the technique and the method and the protocol. I have a protocol in 5 phases, which is pretty well described in another lecture, of this radical experimental cartography ends up to do, helping us to detect the processes and to make emerging, to make visible what is invisible. Now, very rapidly, so Trevor Paglen, you will have him there. There is 2 practices. This will be my last. I'm a little bit longer than what I'm allowed, but I want to also go to some practices in radical or critical cartography, which shows that you can have, you can follow a very traditional methodology for putting together the elements, having an intention, collecting the data, and then process to the representation of those data. And it can happen in various ways. And this is where it's very interesting in terms of mode of expression. Elise Olmedo was one of my students, and she was working for her PhD thesis on the way women in Marrakesh are moving in domestic space, private space, and in public space. And she made maps out of this, and she thought those maps are extremely poor. They do not render the huge emotions I had when I was with those women. So they discussed with the woman, and they wanted first to find a way to represent which were really much more deep in a way, but also she wanted that the woman appropriate the representation mode. And the woman said, we know how to knit and we know how to sew, so we will do some things with materials. And they have done those maps, and here on those maps, each colors, each form, each material is representing some things that have experimented either on the private, the domestic space, or in the space. This is explained, and there is a key, so you are not lost. The map comes with a key and the things. When we started this project with Joseph and the teams, various teams in the Philippines, we have been doing a first map which was the expressions of sensorial. And you will see, so thanks to Sofia Belago, I'm not sure if she's still working in this, she was describing the way she did experiment the area where she's living, Marikina. And here we have been choosing to do a very traditional representation of all the feelings she was speaking about. So the map is not my map, it's not our map. This is the map of Sofia. We were just holding for her the pencil and we were drawing according to what she was saying. So we don't have very much time and we can see the map much more quietly on the PowerPoint. But what is interesting here about what we call toxic places or healthy places, because that was the idea. We think a toxic places, it's a very polluted places where the smell of the air is bad, where the water is polluted. But she thought that the shopping mall, which are with air conditioning, very clean, sterilized, was a very toxic place because this is pushing to consumption, pushing to spending money. There was a lot, we go there by car, so it's bad for the environment because then you use oil and you are polluting, etc. So the idea, the concept of toxic, healthy, etc., is also very relative and has a huge political aspect as well. So to conclude, there is on the PowerPoint many other, I was not intended to show everything to you, and we can stop here for there and we show a little bit more of these practices that you have in the PowerPoint when you download it, 6 or 7 examples of very specific practices that you can explore and maybe which could be of a huge inspiration for you. Maybe just one, which is very exceptional, and then we finish on this. This is what we call it la carte dansée. I didn't really find the French way of, this is the danced map, the map you are dancing. And you are dancing on the map, but the map is a dance itself. And this is an experiment we have done with a map of migration routes from Africa, West Asia, Middle East toward Europe, this movement migration. So that was the base. That's the choreographers, 2 choreographers, one from Tunisia, one from Italy, asked me to do. And what they do with this map, they were studying the dancers, professional dancers were studying the map, trying to find the movement, redraw the map on the floor. So we are really it's more than radical mapping, it's really experimental mapping. And we're trying to find a choreography which were depicting what the migrants were feeling and were experimenting while moving from where they were coming from to the place of these huge routes. And we can show it on the map, and we show the routes, and we show that they have walked for 2,000 kilometers, for example. But the sufferance, what they have experimented, you cannot show this on the map, and this is where it's very rich. This kind of experimental mapping and experiment can really depict what was the feeling of the migrants. I think I have, and we can find out this. We will finish with this video. That these are the 2 choreographers. That was a 1 full week in a museum in Paris, and then finally they have made this experiment, which has been after spread in all France and in some places in Europe and in North Africa. And I will leave you, and we will finish with 2 extracts of 30 seconds. You have here all what the map cannot show, and this is where this is the exploration, which is really important. It shows how they collapse. The time, everything is slow. They are waiting for days, weeks, months in front of the office where they have to get their paper. Everything is slow, and you have this metronome which shows there. So you're really in front of an artwork. It's a theater play. It's a choreography. It's a map, and they are describing a map. And I put a lot of hope that we could do this in the future a little bit more. So now we are coming to the end of this journey into this sensorial mapping and this kind of exploratory mapping. Then I will leave it for you with the hope you have had a little bit inspiration, with the hope that you would also appropriate some of the concepts we have approached here. Please look into the PowerPoint. Please look into the website, visioncarto.net, copy-paste for translating in English or in your language. If you want the article, some of them are in English. They are also full of those experiments. And this is really, and we share it. It's open 7 days a week, all year long, and it's an open door on all what you can do with mapping. And thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Philip. You know, I've heard this lecture before, and it's amazing how much I learned from this each time this is presented, and it's interesting to know that this has taken a little bit more of time to talk, because I never felt like there's a distance or there is a time lapse, so to speak, of the lecture that Philip has presented. I'm speaking for everyone, I believe, for most of the people who are here, that thank you for providing us with possibilities of cartography in terms of performance, bodies, emotions, art, and I'm sure this has truly resonated with a lot of us. At this point, one more time, thank you, Philip. At this point, we will be proceeding with the open forum. You may use the Zoom chat box to type your questions or comments, or you may raise your hand and wait to be acknowledged before you can directly ask your questions to Philip.
Mm-hmm.
There is one question here, Philip. I'm just going to read this to you real quick. There is a Bergsonian thing in your earlier explanation, as I think referring to Henri Bergson, yeah, right? Especially subjectivity and the emotions, or something like Bachelard, Gaston Bachelard, who happens to have read Bergson. It differs, however, that Bergson falls under the emotions of time together with Heraclitus, if we are to take Rovelli's description of these philosophers and their takes on time. Is there emotion of space? Is that what you mean of cartography as a subjective practice? Do you think that the lived experience of time, as it was called Jure by Bergson, or duration in English, can meet with your take of radical cartography? But would that be contrary to being lived as space-time adheres something relativistic that is scientific and abstract? Or art is enough to radicalize the space-time abstraction, like the video you showed?
Yeah. How many times do you have to explain? It's a rather complex question, so I'm not sure I can address this in a reasonable amount of time. But I see, I really see what you mean. This relationship between emotion and territories, space and territories. This is so. I'm not sure I will answer as scientifically as you would expect these precise questions, referring first to Bergson, which is one of my favorite author, and maybe without knowing him, I may have also had some inspirations, as I have inspirations from Otto Neurath's approach and concepts, and of course the whole literature from Bunge a little bit later. Here it's a little bit more fundamental, of course, because if we speak about Bergson, there is this dichotomy between the two. So if I take your question, the first aspect, emotion of space, definitely what I have been noticing when I was working in the Le Monde Diplomatique in a newspaper, we were asked to map something which were very concrete and always in the urgency because that was conflict in Congo, etc. And I went on the field to have a sense. I have extensively walked in Jerusalem or in Palestine, extensively walked also in Rwanda, in Burundi especially. And then what I understood is that these geopolitical maps, and most of the time they depict everything, but not what you feel on the field. So I had the kind of frustration, probably like Charles Joseph Minard in the 19th century. He was frustrated that he saw all the map, and he says, I want to explain the things with my maps. And I wanted to explain the emotion I had, the fear. There is a lot of emotions that are never appearing on the map. When we made this map called Dying at the Entry of Europe, yeah, maybe we don't have time. I have a map, this map, which shows, okay. It shows Europe with big circles red that represents the number of fatalities of migrants coming to enter irregularly in Europe. And there is dozens of thousands of them. And we were drawing this map by hand drawing, and it was displayed in the Museum of Art. That's also interesting. It's not the Institute of Geography which displayed the map. This is the Museum of Modern Art in Vienna, in Austria. And for the opening, we invited the community of migrants because that was an exhibit speaking about migrants. And they were in front of the map. And they looked at the map and they understood what was the map, because those guys, some of them, they were on the boat crossing the sea trying to get in Europe. And some of them have seen some friends dying, drowning into the sea. And then suddenly they said, now we see on this map that the cartographer was extremely upset. And I understood that the map could, with the mean of art, render the emotions. Because when you open a newspaper and you see a map, I think you don't say, oh my God, the cartographer, he was really upset. He was not happy at all. And this is the relationship I would do between the territory and the emotions. And this is what I'm interested in. It's okay to depict processes and to understand with arrows where the people are, from where they are living and where they are going. But I'm much more interested to try to find a way to depict the emotions. So the relationships, territories, and emotions, it's maybe there. I don't want to be too long, but I think your questions, actually, we have to copy paste, but it's not possible to copy paste. If somebody could copy the question and paste or find a way to paste it in a Word file and send it to me, this would be very great. I never managed to do that.
We can do that for you.
Yes, and send it to.
Yeah, I'll send it along with the certificate.
And now, as you have seen in the last experiments, you speak about durée or duration. This is also something which is in the heart of the research we are doing to try to depict emotions and duration. So this is why I think the question is very interesting. It definitely addressed the question of duration, but we don't try to deny it, but we try to compress the time. I'm trying to explain how we do those maps. When you proceed to create a map that is conveying message, which happens to have spread on the territory and to have a spread in the time, so it is spatial temporal maps, you have two challenges, and you have to compact those two challenges to make it understandable and to be able to convey appropriately the message. And this is what the carte dansée, the danced map, is also doing, because you have the map, you have the territorial extent, and you have the feelings, which are slowness, because it's always very slow, the movement, the collapsing, and the waiting time, which is expressing marvelously well the duration. But so far, I didn't find any other way to represent that. Sorry to be short on this, but your questions would deserve a whole lecture.
There is another question, Philip, for you. This was sent to me privately, so I'm just going to read this for you. Thank you for your time discussing with us radical cartography. I just get curious, if maps are highly subjective, how can they be used for legal purposes, or how can they be air quotes reliable sources for
Yeah,
communities to use for their legal battles? Does the
that
state or the Okay.
okay.
Yeah, I'm just gonna finish the last question. Does the state of the legal world accept documents such as maps?
Yeah, it could be felt as a paradox. That's right. We are speaking about something different. So there is, of course, you have navigation maps. You have that you use to fly uh, aircrafts or boats, which are specifically using. But I would not call them thematical maps. They are maps because they are somehow a representation of the world for a very specific use. Um, when Bungie was expressing the idea that he wanted to use the drawing as an evidence, uh, he was more speaking about the process of gathering, of collecting the information and the data based on the also interviews. Like we are going to proceed to on anthropologic interviews, which are as many interviews are as many testimonies of the people, and they are referenced. And out of those interviews, he will do nothing else, exactly like Mark Lombardi has done or Trevor Paglen. Out of the interviews, he will represent them in a way which is going to be subjective in terms of the geography. So the use of the legal way to convince a judge is not to convince that things happen exactly at those places, although the locations are approximative. It's to convince the judge that there is a discrimination process ongoing, which is obvious and which is backed up by the interviews and by the data collected on the field, disregarding the way it's visually represented. And the question is interesting because in Canada, at the beginning, in the First Nations communities that we were working with, they were fitting to the space, so they had implemented a GIS system where they were putting all the places where they think there were a discrimination or a grab of land or anything that they were complaining in front of the judge. They arrived with a GIS map, which was totally unbearable, ununderstandable because you had so millions elements. And the trial couldn't happen, and the judge didn't want even to see it. He says, I don't understand it. I just don't understand. And then you bring me this map and these documents with full of information, and then I'm unable to see what you wanted to see there because there was no semiology applied, no geometry, no thoughts behind that. So the genius idea of Bungi, and afterwards all the people who were bouncing on the work of Bungi, was to create a document which is highly subjective because it used point, line, points, and it used the means of the means of art basically to render the result and the findings of a huge amount of information which have been hierarchized, synthesized, and worked and presented. I didn't have the time to show some projects that I have done with database where you have like 200,000 cells, and you represent this in a small map, which shows what is essential to understand.
Thank you, Philip. And I apologize for the noise I just made. I have two more questions here, and one was sent privately, and then I'm gonna also read the one that was sent publicly, and also maybe respond to it as well. But this came from another one that was sent privately. Said, "Hello, Sir Philip. What kind of role do you think virtual reality and augmented reality play as a medium for cartography?"
You said you want to answer this one?
No, the other one.
The other one.
Let me just virtual reality and augmented reality.
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure how to address this.
I can maybe respond a little bit to it, if you will allow.
Yeah, you know, of course.
We have a geographer among us who has done research on ludic geography or playful mapping, and he used a Pokemon Go as an aspect of it because it's augmented reality. So I thought what was interesting about it was that when he was doing mapping of when you're playing Pokemon Go, you're actually in the spheres of two worlds pretty much. You are in the world wherein there are certain rules that govern it. This may not necessarily match with the one that is going on in that other sphere. I don't want to call it non-real world because what is real, what is not is another thing that we can talk about. But when he enters the world of Pokemon Go, there is a rule there that he has to follow. And so when he is not within that Pokemon Go world, then he engages with the world that he currently is materially rooted to. So what I think is very important was that the mapping that is being done in the ludic part, which is in Pokemon Go, is not necessarily very different from the one he's traversing in the one that he engages when he's not playing with it. So he just thought that it actually made him keenly aware of so many other things in the non-Pokemon Go world when he enters the Pokemon Go world. I think to make that even maybe less obfuscating is to say that definitely this augmented reality has opened up new ways of mapping a different sphere other than the one we are engaging in an everyday kind of sense. And I know some people here, I know for a fact, some colleagues of mine are actually gamers and they play this a lot. They may have an opinion on this too, but yeah, definitely there is an interface in the type of mapping, differently calibrated for sure, but they are mapping very different realities. Now, let's just put it that way.
I know why I have it's difficult for me to answer this because in the same times it's scary because I have really recent experiences. I can talk about my kids about and then we are starting to be in an era which is a real revolution. We speak about ChatGPT. And there is in cartography also an equivalent of ChatGPT. There is many things now that can be done by IA or AI, artificial intelligence, and I would say that this is extremely powerful, and this is a problem because there is perversion. It perverts also the vision and the reality we have. This is why. In my 5 phases methodology, I fit to this so that we are sure that we have a root of something which is scientific, which is how we process, how we think the intention, how we process the data. Because my kids, I have a son, he's 16 years old, and he already through YouTube, through TikTok, through many social networks, is convinced that TikTok is an information media. He's convinced he can earn $1 million without doing nothing, just posting videos on YouTube. So they are transported in a virtual world which becomes real. And there is here this confusion between what is the real world and what is the absolute virtual world they are offering, and especially because they stay in front of the screen. And for the maps, it's the same. There is a risk of confusion. So it addressed the question decided, and I don't know how to confront this and how to get to stay on a track where you are biased. I assume the idea that we are subjective, that we are representing an interpretation of the world much more than the world, but it doesn't mean that we invent the world completely. Although, of course, now in times of war, you can always say after you can rewrite the history. After all, the Russians are saying now that they didn't start the war, that the war has been started by the Ukrainians and NATO. So you see, we are in a world where we forget extremely easily. It goes very fast. We are in a world where the knowledge is extremely ephemeral. It comes, it goes around, and then we forget. So this is all those questions which remains unanswered for me. and I don't know how to confront and address and work with that in the future. So that's also why the question was is very, very difficult to answer. We just kind of open track.
Thank you, Philip. Yes, some of these questions probably require a lot of thought rather than just some kind of, providing a quick answer just to satisfy, especially when you are coming from a different school of thought. There's one question here that was posted here in the public forum, public Zoom chat. It said, I find radical cartography as a divergence to the rules of conventional cartography, where paintings and drawings and dancing are also maps and spatial representations. But I find them too specific or particular, or more like representations of personal feelings and ideas. I'm sure that is very exciting to do, but I worry about their usefulness to the wider public or for public policies. And I also worry how these radical cartography or maps are also appreciated by those in power or the duty bearer, like public officials, or do these radical maps even reach them? I can respond to this, Jake, as well. But Philip, I wanted to hear. Do you want me to go ahead first, or you can respond now?
No. Yeah, please. Yeah. I have just two things to say. So please develop.
I'm sorry to hijack this moment, and this is really Philip's talk. But as someone who teaches counter cartography, and we differ on a lot of our ideas. It's fine, it's all discursive. I think this question that was asked about radical cartography, kind of how do I say this? It's not really intended for that to be used. It's not, the utility or functionality may not necessarily be the reason why they were created in the first place. So, for example, when you look at the early the surreal maps that were done in the late 1920s to the 1930s in Germany, as well as in psychogeographic areas in the US, they were really not supposed to reach the powers that be, or as you call them, the duty something. I think those mentioned here, the duty bearer, like public officials. They are meant to be interventions done by people who are dispossessed and marginalized, and they were not really given their own space before. So these types of radical mapping that were done before were really just a way to reassert that there's no monolithic map. There's just no way with which we can all understand realities through one kind of map. For example, and I'm sure Philip knows this pretty well, and maybe a lot of you may know this, is the one done by Guy Debord in 1950s. The map of Paris, which was of course a cutout of the map of Paris, but it showed a kind of mapping done by the so-called common people, which are the areas they traverse, rather than a much bigger official looking map of Paris. So maybe that's just one of the things. And one last thing before I give this to Philip is also because, yes, you are right. This is pretty much correct when you say they are very particular and specific, and they talk about very subjective experience or engagement of a person towards their own environment, their everyday thing that they do. And they're not meant to be as a way to really change the maps that we have right now. They are meant to show that we cannot just be using only one kind of map, which is one of the reasons why about 3 years or maybe 4 years ago, when the United States decided to maybe adopt the Peters projection as the de facto map that will be used rather than the Mercator map that we have been using, and let me just end by this quote. When we had this workshop before among high school students pre-pandemic, there was this one girl who asked me this question. So you're talking about different kinds of maps and projections, which is the correct map then? And I really must have broken her heart when I said, there's no such thing. Each map projection has this very specific purpose, right? So Mercator projection, if your purpose is place names, that can work. Just be aware of the things that it was created in the first place as a kind of colonial project to go from point A to point B as a as a way to occupy certain kinds of territories, you know, and I don't know if I was able to satisfy her, but that's pretty much the gist of it. But that's just one take, you know. I'm not saying this is the correct one, but that's one of the reasons why counter cartography also developed in the niche, in the more marginalized sector, because it is, they feel like they're not represented enough by this so-called official maps. Philip, do you want to respond?
Yeah, so just two short things. The first thing it's the quote of Jake, which I'm talking about. When you say you worry that these radical maps are also appreciated by those in power or the duty-bearer like public officials, they don't necessarily reach them, but when they reach them, they know so well what it is. Like, for example, when Trevor Paglen has managed to trace all the CIA secret flights which were transporting prisoners from Afghanistan, Somalia, etc., to bring them to Guantanamo, to countries in Europe to be imprisoned and tortured. That was a secret program. And with public data, Trevor Paglen has made a map that he was displaying in a big advertisements panel in Los Angeles, and then brought the TV. And when that was displayed and made public, it became a scandal and the program stopped. So that was an effect. And this is what phase 2 of radical cartography. Phase 1 is set up the landscape. Phase 2, make a difference on the field. And the difference was that this was stopped. So it reaches them. I personally had an experience where I have lectured in European Parliament in Brussels about migrations and about the fact that the policies implemented by the parliamentarian were directly responsible for the death of those dozens of thousands of people. They just couldn't, and I showed the map that was actually this one. Oh, sorry. This map, which shows how they are dying, you see, in Europe. And when I have shown that, I've been kicked out. Lecture was interrupted, and I've been kicked out of the hall because it's very difficult for the map is in there. It's very difficult for those which are responsible. They are making the law with huge restrictions on 2/3 of the humanities to travel within Europe, even though they need it for medical reasons or whatever. They're obliged to do it irregularly, to take boat and to take huge risks, and then they die. And when suddenly you make a work and you present this work directly to them, and they understand suddenly that they are responsible for those fatalities, and then they are therefore criminals, then this is also one of the idea we activists, geographers, even though we are scientists or academics, want to reach, to raise awareness not only on the general public. This is one thing they need to know. The general public need to know. You need to know as a general public. But we need to make the difference and to try to force the decision makers to change the law so that they stop killing migrants which are trying to come in Europe. So this is basically how I would answer the question. Now, I do understand also very well how skeptic we could be with this cartography, because it doesn't use, we use, of course, the convention. You have seen maps, it's done with colors, with movement, and you recognize the country. So we use the traditional tools and science of building, of creating a map. But it can be very different because we have way of expression which are very different, especially when we dance the map. But we found out since the 30, 40 years that I'm working by trying to promote an alternative way of mapping the world, of mapping issues, that going through the pathway of art and displaying in museums was much more accepted than if you do it through scientific papers or in the newspaper. It's less direct, it's less violent. But now, of course, the people in power, they start to understand that through an exhibit, they question the policy of Israel, the apartheid policy of Israel toward Palestinians, and they start to complain, and some of these exhibits are forced to close artistic exhibit they're forced to close because they are an offense to a country or to the sovereignty of a country. They do this, but for very long, it was much more easy to express ourselves through the artistic means so that we could convey much more powerfully and much more easily the languages. But I want to say that I share I share the idea, and I understand that one can be skeptic to this extremely original way of doing the things. So this is also why it's a work in constant evolution, and we are researching the way of doing it so that we could bring we could answer and meet the needs of everybody.
Thank you, Philip. Just a time check. It's 3 minutes before 7 o'clock or 3 minutes before 12 noon for Philip. And I know you've been very generous with your time, and there are lots of questions I've been receiving on private. And Philip, if you don't mind, I can just send them to you. And maybe you can think about them when you present this in the future. But we do want to acknowledge several questions that were asked both publicly and privately. There were quite a few that were sent to me privately to be read, but I'm really sorry that we cannot accommodate.
Please collect everything. Send me the questions with the address, if possible, with the email address of the people or you, and then you can forward. But if I have the email address, then I can send everybody. I found the question extremely interesting and very challenging. And it
Philip,
requires.
I was wondering if you could put your email instead, so that there might be. They might be interested.
The people could send. Send my,
I'll also screen capture this questions and send them to you. But in case they would rather go straight to you, can you just type your email in the Zoom chat? Maybe your WUR email, our WUR email that we're using.
Absolutely. So this is.
Yes, and also some of the questions that were asked earlier. Even if you kind of responded to them, I'm still gonna send them as questions, for you to think about. Guess what, folks? We're approaching the 1.5 hours point, and some of us still have to conduct classes and also to give Philip his the lunch break that is going to happen pretty soon.
I have some deadlines, so I don't think.
Yes, true. But one thing I wanted to let everyone know too, in relation to this very provocative a presentation by Philip, was also he's coming to the Philippines later this year. Philip, we're thinking maybe September, October. We're not sure
yes,
yet.
I think it will be 15 days or maybe 2 or 3 weeks, depending on what we have to do. And then we are going in the heart. Now we are really working on mapping, sensorial mapping of Marikina, Baguio, and the two things with the students, with the representative of the communities. So we have to really very much discuss about the protocols, about the way to go.
Il est 12 heures.
And beside this, I'm of course extremely open, and I would be more than happy to have some contact with you, to have some discussions. We can have a meal somewhere, and why not a workshop where we could share our view, because I see that there is really extremely deep concerns, and I like it very much. Then I think it would be extremely interesting to exchange that we could evaluate further.
But I think the question.
Thank you very much, everybody, for that.
And I think the questions are really something that may have triggered them to ask them based on your presentation. So we thank you for that. And like I said earlier, I'm just gonna give you a screen capture, but just for the audience, just to give you a sense of some of the questions that were being asked here about, certain maps that Philip also showed, especially the kitchen map, the dance, especially were really something that may have resonated really well with other people. So thank you very much. And I feel bad that we can't accommodate all of them, but we do have some time constraints.
And
so
I will answer. I will answer for sure. It will take 3 days, but
Yes. Yes, there you have it. Yeah, Philip Rekacewicz. Okay. Righto. So we are now going towards the, well, anyway, thank you for the insightful discussion and also for the questions that were sent by members of this webinar. At this point,
Wow.
allow me to present the certificate of appreciation to our speaker.
Yeah, on the paper,
And
there will be no turning wheel. That's I like the turning wheel.
yes. Oh, unfortunately, we can't do. But one of our really creative undergrads, Philip, I will make sure that you're gonna meet with him. Was really inventive in creating this turning wheel thing. So this certificate of appreciation is given to Philip Rekacewicz for the valuable insights and expertise shared as virtual resource speaker for the talk Radical and Experimental Practices in Cartography as part of the Geo Lecture Series 2023 held on March 7, 2023, signed by yours truly, Joseph Palis and Emmanuel B. Garcia, the president of the Philippine Geographical Society.
Excellent.
And just to give you a sense of what's to come for this month, John Rennie Short, you may know him, Philip. He's from Maryland, so he's aware of the radical tradition in geography as well. He from the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, is actually here in Manila and doing a lot of research on West Philippine Sea and urban ecologies in Manila, but he's going to talk about the urban ecologies in Manila on March 17 at 5:30 p.m. Philippine time. And then Irene Andal, Filipina based in Macquarie University and also in a university in the Russian Federation, was awarded by the Institute of Human Geography a grant for this project that she will share with us on March 31st, 4 p.m. Philippine Standard Time. What if children created a fictional city, urban imaginaries of slum-dwelling children in San Jose del Monte City, Philippines. So, and then we have April, May. We have a lot more who's coming. Hold on a second. Okay. So, also our past lectures are all stored in the UP Department of Geography YouTube channel. You can visit our channel to watch our previous lectures as well as other recorded events of the Philippine Geographical Society and the Department of Geography.